I'm Brad.
I'm Scott.
Welcome to Curiosity.
And we are here today with Amanda Edwards. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time coming out, so I'm excited to be here.
Love it. We are thrilled to have you here. We sort of on Curiosity like to create a space for people who don't want to sit at the table and behave, but would rather defy the rules and amaze. That's kind of like our little adopted tagline. It's pretty much going to be ours. Like, I don't think Apple's coming after us, but
I think that if anything, they should feel inspired by the fact that we were so inspired by the narrative that they put together.
We're just creating an echo
kind
for
of
it.
create the echo
It
for,
just
on their
gets
behalf.
to like live on.
Yeah. So we're going to carry it onward. Apple, you're welcome. And if you want to sponsor us, that's fine too.
So in like true Curiosity podcast fashion, we're going to just explore kind of who you are, Amanda. Like,
All
I'm
right.
looking forward to it. And so in that, like, get to ask like some dumb questions and things because
Oh,
I'm just sort of
Lord.
curious. Like, are you from Houston originally?
Originally from
Okay.
Houston, so inside of the city limits, not the greater Houston area,
All right. All
but
right.
inside the city limits. In fact, I grew up on the northwest side of town in a neighborhood called Inwood Forest. So went to Eisenhower High School, which is in the Aldine Public School District. So I am through and through Houstonian.
You are an OG Houstonian.
I am.
I'm learning there's not as many
I know.
Houstonians
tough to,
as there
like,
are
come
people who
across
have
on that.
moved to Houston.
That's
I grew up in the
awesome.
Houston area, and I often get asked, "Are you from Houston?" I'm like, "I'm from the Houston area," and they're like, "Whoa, I haven't met a lot of people that are from here." And I'm like, "Whoa, okay."
Brad, where
Well,
did you grow up?
Dickinson.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So there we go.
I know. Let's see if we're getting to learn things about each other that we didn't even know while we're on
right
the
out of the
show.
gates.
And I felt like we knew things. So, why do you get out of bed every day?
Well, that's a great question. I happen to be running for mayor, so there's a very clear goal and motivation, but it comes from, you really asked me about my origins and growing up, and it actually comes from my childhood. When I was like about 10 years old, my dad was diagnosed with something called multiple myeloma.
Mm.
And that is like a form of a very aggressive form of cancer. And when I was growing up, I started to learn some things about our healthcare system. And that was by way of me asking my dad lots of questions about things like whether this health insurance stuff, because of course I didn't know what that was when I was a kid, but whether they would cover my dad's treatments and what would happen if they said no. And I remember my dad, he would, kind of pause when I'd ask that kind of question and say things like, oh, well, we'd have to figure something else out. And I just knew with that type of response that
Mhm.
something was not quite right. Like, people should not have that be,
Mm.
pretty much a life or death situation. And gratefully for my father, he was able to get treatment that he needed. He did pass away from cancer, but there's so many other people who don't get the access that they need, don't get the help that they need. And I think about my dad, he was able to stay around until I was 17. And those were like really
Yeah,
part of
that's a
my
big deal.
real foundational years. What if he hadn't been able to do that? So kind of out of that experience really gave me this purpose and motivation to serve. I was always kind of interested in that, but really serve with purpose,
Mm.
right? And that doesn't mean just pursue a political office because you want to be in charge. It's really about thinking about the people whose lives might be lying in the balance by the things that you do or that you don't do, based on the fact that you occupy positions of public trust, public service, right? So,
Yeah.
so often I think it's the case that people are motivated by the politics of things versus the service and the impact, and most importantly, the focus on people. So for me, when I get up, and of course I'm running for mayor, but besides for that, I always think about impact in people,
Mm.
and so much of the time we spend thinking about other things in the public service world. So that's what gets me up. That
Just
makes me
love that.
worry, and then makes me excited, right?
Mm.
So there's good and there's challenges to it, but
The
there's
whole
some,
spectrum
yeah,
of
exactly.
emotions with it. Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
because you were talking, I was just kind of thinking, as someone who knows like hardly anything about the political, public service, government space, like obviously we see a lot in the media of what's happening, and most of the time it's a very biased perspective, one way or another. And so you're constantly trying to like fill in the gaps and like try to get to where the truth probably actually is versus where it isn't. But one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking is like, do you think there's like a moment in time sometimes in the political space where like the person in that office can become numb to, or like I guess, is there a tipping point? How do you control for that? How do you ensure that you're constantly empathetic and having your sights on the right things? Because if I look at how the rhetoric is of people in politics today, especially at the federal level, and I just hear the words that are coming out of the mouths of humans, it's not very human.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering, like what causes that?
Yeah, I mean, there's several things, right? I mean, you gotta, and I tell people this all the time. People say, "I want to run for office," and I say, "Well, should I? What do you think? Do you think I should run?" And I say back to them, "You've got to examine very closely why you want to run,
Mm,
and if the running is about you or about power or about your ambition solely, I think that the answer should be no." But if it's about people and the impacts and the ability to affect change, then I think that's wholly different. And so often it's the case. We have a bunch of folks in public service who really should be political pundits or commentators who
mm,
are now in roles of public trust where they make decisions that sacrifice the public for their political or politics. We see it all the time. I mean, you're talking about what you see in the news cycle. That happens each and every single day. And so I think with that in mind, some people go into it with the politics in mind. They like the maneuvering, they like the game, and they perceive it to be a game.
Mm.
But I
mm,
think that's part of the problem. I don't see it as a game at all. I see politics as a means that through which I have to navigate to get to the outcomes that people deserve. So I see myself as someone who can be a conduit for change that people deserve in our communities, as opposed to someone who's playing a game. And oftentimes, when you see it as a game, then there are political chips. And in my view, we see it every day. People use, I mean, people in public office can use the people as political chips
Mm.
in a broader game of who gets more power, how can I acquire it, and how can I position myself for the next move. And if you look at politics and public service in that way, the people always lose. And I think that's the problem. Also, sometimes to the second part of your question or the origins of that question, you asked me,
mm,
why does that happen sometimes? Sometimes people didn't have the people at the forefront to begin with. Sometimes they did go in with good intentions and then they get jaded. They
mm,
see that it's hard to impact change, for example. So
Mm.
if I can't really do the things I thought I was going to be able to do, I wanted to change the world and then I didn't do it, well, at least I
mm,
can navigate this space in this way. And so they start getting disconnected from their why. And so I always like to go back to that
Mm.
why. Every time I have a meeting, we start with the mission because if you don't, it's easy to get distracted by things that ultimately don't further the mission. And I think it requires a lot of discipline to do that, lots of discipline to do that. But a lot of the times people are looking to get into public service. They're looking for power. They're looking maybe even for who they are. And so you can't, I don't define myself by myself and my, as you would like to put it, me being a human by which office I hold.
Mm.
I see the offices that I hold as the means through which I can impact change. So the particular way that I can affect these sets of policies for you, as opposed to I am this person who is an office holder and that's the extent of my identity. But a lot of times it's also that lack of understanding self and then the motivation not to help others. I mean, not to really further that agenda in an aggressive way because there's lots of competing interests.
so there's like so much beauty said there, and I just want to like deconstruct that a little bit because I think it's relevant regardless of what you're doing with your life's energy, right?
Yeah.
And a couple different points of view of what you shared are like really important to maybe overstate a bit. One is, I think every human, and the earlier we can do it, the better. We have to get introspective. And there's an author named Bob Goff, and he talks about getting under the ice cap of our humanity. and getting to the uncomfortable places where the tension is, where some of the battle scars are, where things that we just didn't want to address might be living,
Mhm.
and some of the beautiful, wonderful things of our humanity as well, but just really like facing head on who we really are instead of trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
And I remember in a podcast recently, there was this gentleman who was described as an innovator and pretty globally famous in a lot of the work that he had done in his respective field. And it was so interesting. They asked him like, "What's the key to innovation?" And he effectively said, "Being introspective and knowing who you are as a human being. Because if you don't have that self confidence,
Mhm.
you're going to get tossed around by the wind." And
Mm.
I think it's just so important to be mindful of that and really be intentional about get introspective, get under the ice cap of your humanity and explore for yourself who you are and become become confident in your identity.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite quotes I heard when I was 8 years old, and it shaped so much of my philosophy. And it effectively said, "What the world needs is people who have come fully alive." Like, we don't need everyone to just kind of follow some path that's already laid out or that we think perceptively is how we're supposed to be in society. But like, take a moment in the power of the pause to discover for yourself your own humanity. And I think my theory is when we do that, we have a strong foundation to stand on.
Mhm.
We're anchored to something that's altruistic that we believe in. And then we use that power that we now have within our own humanity and identity to become our identity. And then in turn, what results from that is we actually are able to navigate through life in a way that's strong and sound and firm and consistent. And therefore, we aren't going to experience the slow fade that otherwise happens.
Mhm.
But I think perceptively, we look at people in positions of quote unquote power and we just assume they have it all figured out. So
Mhm.
I think it's also a bit on us as humans and as society to say, hey, I shouldn't put someone on a pedestal simply because they have a position.
Mhm.
I should really be intentional about myself and the impact that I can make and then decide from there where I want to focus my energy and attention and effort.
Mhm.
And the last thing I'll kind of say on that is in the spirit of not getting caught up in the slow fade and looking in the mirror at some point in the future and going, who is this human? I don't even recognize them. My character has changed. My personality has changed. My wants and interests and desires have changed. But instead, to do exactly what you said and to stay very consistent with the why. And that's a
Mhm.
daily check in.
Every day.
I
Every
love
day.
that.
It's like your personal, it's your mission, it's your assignment. We all have a purpose here. And my purpose is different from the person down the street, and everybody's got a different one, and I always just feel as though you may not know that. So if you don't have the answer to that question of what is your purpose, you should be in pursuit of that answer and continue to push until you find that. And, in mine, it wasn't about me being in spaces that I was most comfortable. I was practicing law. I was a municipal finance attorney in a big firm. I was serving on nonprofit boards. So I had like the best of all those worlds. But I knew that my purpose wasn't about me being in those spaces where I was most comfortable. It was really about, because I don't even like politics, y'all. I didn't even tell you that. But it was about being in the spaces where I was most needed. And I know that we need real servant leaders who have both a bold vision for the community, but also an ability to execute on that. So those technical skills are important. So it's both and in my view. And so with that in mind, I had to navigate through, asking myself, is this worth the sacrifice? Meaning I don't like politics. So I say that all the time. I know that's cliche. It sounds cliche at least, but it's the truth. I absolutely, if I could just cut to the public service, not navigate the politics, I would do that all day, every day and just be serving. But that's not how it works. It's the real world, and you got to navigate a lot of politics to get to the outcomes you're looking for your community in my case. And so I sell it to say you've got to always be asking that question, what is my purpose? And because I'm so clear about my purpose in terms of just really being a vessel and conduit through which change can flow in our community, it allows me the ability to deal with what I don't like quite as much, right?
Mm.
So
It
I
puts it
deal
into
with
context in a
yeah,
lot of
because it's
ways.
like,
Like,
yeah, you gotta get through this. Hold your nose, and I gotta hold my nose. You get dunked a few times, and but then you come out on the other side, and you're just so, when that impact, when you're able to see that impact, and you know what it means for people, it's so worth it. At least for me, because that's in line with my purpose. Now, it may not feel the same way for the next person. They're like, why does she get so excited about X? Because that's not your purpose. And whatever your purpose is, and it doesn't have to be being an elected office holder. It doesn't have to be anything broad. It can be something more narrow. It might be your family. Whatever it is, figure it out so that you then can align with purpose. Because I think that's when people are happier. I think that's when people excel, is when their alignment is there. When they're off, when they're misaligned and they're trying to figure it out and they're frustrated. I think that's where a lot of frustration can come from. I'm not saying it's perfect. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean just because you found your purpose that it's going to be easy every day or that you're happy about everything. But it certainly does allow you the ability to navigate through challenging times a whole lot easier when you know where you're going and why you're going there.
you've touched on it a little bit. I'm curious on the sort of sources of inspiration, like because the things that you're talking about in terms of servant leadership and having a clear, if sort of view of identity, like
Hmm.
that self awareness that's required. Just sort of as you reflect back, sort of in the varied experiences that you've had,
Yeah.
where have you seen it sort of work? Like, is there sort of an example where, just to kind of make it tangible?
Yeah, I'll use the example when I was actually serving as a city council member and at large. And I, of course, was serving at a time when Hurricane Harvey hit our city. So I don't have to tell
Mm,
y'all what that meant to our city.
yeah.
51 inches of rainfall,
We were
100.
here.
You were here. You
9
lived it.
trillion gallons of
Yeah.
water, which I still
See, I
have a
never used 9
very
trillion.
hard
I'm gonna have to
time.
start saying that. 9
Yeah,
trillion. And
9
then
trillion gallons of water, which I saw a visualization of it, and it was like, I forget how high above the city
Yeah, it's
it was
that big
stacked. Yeah,
cube
it
of
was.
water
I haven't
above it.
seen that. Send that to me.
Yeah,
It's a cool image.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll dig it up.
yeah,
I
I'll
was
go
in a
find it.
WhatsApp chat because I started my Rice MBA that weekend.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so we
Oh
were
my
in
gosh.
class down at
Yeah.
Rice on that Friday,
Yeah.
and they were like, we
It's
got
coming.
for the first half of the day, and then they were like,
Mm.
everybody go home.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's it. Okay, where I know you want to get to a point, and I love it,
Yeah.
and I want to get there too. But like, where were you
Everybody
right
has a where
before
were you
No,
story.
Harvey hit? So you
literally,
were a
I
Rice
because I live up
MBA.
in the Woodlands, and so I had started this executive MBA program and was staying down at the medical center Marriott. And so I'd come down Thursday night, was staying in the hotel,
Wow.
woke up Friday morning to go to class, and then
Mhm.
they like kicked everybody out and went back to the hotel. And like it was, I was on the 20th floor of this Marriott, whatever, and you just like see like the storm like coming,
Wow.
and it was.
Were you able to get it back home?
And so I made my way, packed up and went home. But they had all these signs everywhere at the Marriott,
Yeah.
like if you're here, you're an idiot, kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
Not that you're an
nobody's
idiot.
here.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's but then obviously like made
Wow.
my way back and battened down the hatches. But
Wow.
anyway, yeah, Harvey was it's
That's
incredible
crazy.
that it's been
5
5
years.
plus
I
years
know.
Yeah.
already.
We're working on the 6th.
Where were you?
Well, I was, interestingly enough, many places. So when the storm was actually, so we knew that this was going to be bad. We didn't know it was going to be this bad.
Yeah.
So we knew it was happening. We did a press conference that Friday morning, and people were kind of shutting down. We were anticipating lots of flooding. We knew that there was a risk, though, that there would be some confusion with message because the
Oh,
rain was what caused the devastation.
yeah.
It wasn't the actual storm.
Yeah.
And so nationally, the media was covering the storm, meaning the actual, hit landfall, the wind, all of those things.
Mm.
Right.
And that wasn't ever so really supposed to be what we were truly concerned about. It was the rains that were just going to sit and hover and just drown our city. And so we knew that was coming. We got people to kind of stay in. But the next day, when it was sprinkling outside instead of torrential downpours, and we've told you, don't, get food and stay in place. And we've, told you to really hunker down.
Oh, that's
And
right.
it was sprinkling outside.
And that
People
was
were like,
Saturday, I think?
that was Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday, I
So
remember.
I was with the fire department on Saturday so we were going in communities trying to convince people who were in areas that we knew would flood
Mm.
to come to the shelter. So imagine having this conversation when it's sprinkling outside, you're not flooding,
Mhm.
why you need to pack up your stuff and come to a shelter. They are looking at us like we were crazy, okay?
Wow.
All the way nuts. And so they are looking at us like, no, I think I'm going to stay here. And I'm like, no, you really want to come to the shelter? So nobody was biting. So that
Wow.
being said, I went back to the Office of Emergency Management. So you have like this whole, like it's a whole thing. Like there's an Office of Emergency Management. You go in, there's all of the, screens,
Mm.
everything. So we were over there and I remember getting the briefing because I was there in person because sometimes you can take them on the phone. I was there in person getting that briefing and they were like, guys, it's much worse. And
Wow.
so it was like maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something there about mid-afternoon. And so the problem that night though was that there was some kind of, was it an MMA fight? What was it?
Oh,
Some
that's
major
yeah,
fight,
I don't
Pacquiao or somebody.
follow sports really well at all, but I just
Some
learned the Super Bowl
major,
Sunday.
it was some
Um,
major fight. Like
yeah, I think was it a guy named
Pacquiao?
Mayweather? Is that the guy's name?
I
I'm
think
the
it was
fact checker
it was
here.
Okay.
I was
So
the Mayweather Pacquiao fight.
Okay.
I'm almost certain of
Yeah,
that.
I remember. I don't know why I remember this, but I totally
Yes.
remember this.
So that was happening that night.
Yeah, that was on
And
Saturday,
so
right?
yeah, it was on Saturday
Yes,
night.
yes.
So everybody said, I've been at home all day. You told me to put
Hunkered
my
down.
car away.
Uh-huh.
You made me cancel all of my plans. I
Was
haven't
that
gone
Friday or
anywhere and it's
Saturday?
not even raining out here
I
like
can't remember if that
that.
was Friday or Saturday.
It was Saturday.
It was Saturday. Okay, it was
Yeah, I
Saturday.
know. It was Saturday
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were
For
like
sure.
in the thick of it in a different
It
way.
was Saturday. And so people were
Gosh.
like antsy.
Yeah.
So they were like,
No,
well, I'm not
yeah.
going to ruin the rest of the weekend.
No, and people went out.
And they went out.
Yeah, and I remember. So that I guess it was that
it was a
Friday night.
Mayweather fight.
Yeah. So I guess it was that Friday night. Sky and I were supporting the women's home, and so I was in the fashion show for the women's home.
Conor McGregor.
Oh,
Okay.
I had it
And
wrong.
I
Mayweather.
definitely would
Mayweather.
not have known that name,
I
but the
said
Mayweather
Pacquiao.
name I remember.
Forgive me.
And so my mom and dad came
Mayweather
up.
won, by the way.
Okay, perfect. That makes me. I'll sleep much better tonight knowing that this person I couldn't pick out in a crowd if I had to won a fight I didn't know was happening. It's amazing. And so anyway, so my mom and dad came up and we invited a bunch of like friends and family friends, and this was I guess Friday night.
Mhm.
And my sister was happenstancely in from Dallas delivering our now 5-year-old nephew, and her husband, and so they're at the women's hospital in Houston, and like all this stuff is happening. And kind of same thing, Saturday morning, Sky and I get up and like go to snooze and have brunch and like everything's kind of fine. My buddy calls me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, having brunch. He's like, aren't you like in the middle of a hurricane? I was like, yeah, but I don't know. It's kind of chill right now. So we decided to go grab some brunch. And then of course, like I vividly remember like 3 a.m. that morning. So Sunday morning, my Sky wakes me up. She's like, hey, you need to wake up. Like, your mom and dad's house, I think, is like flooding in Dickinson. And so come to find out, like I called, my mom's like, yeah, the water's already in the front yard. Within a few hours, it was in the house. And my sister had just had a C-section. And so she couldn't move. She just had major surgery. And so thank God a family friend got in a John boat, drove like 1.5 miles because it was so flooded. Dickinson was the hardest hit area in the entire region. I think over 80% the homes were uninhabitable for at least a year.
Wow.
Most people don't know that, but it was really tragic for the community. And they were able to rescue them very early in the morning and get them safely to another town, a town over. But I mean, the feeling that I still remember of being so helpless. There's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
I couldn't get down there. I had a truck, but wasn't a freaking 6-foot lift. So I wasn't
With a snorkel.
Yeah, with a snorkel. So I wasn't going to be able to get to them. And it was just, it was crazy. The cool thing was, and we'll get back to it, but I never shared this publicly. So it's kind of interesting. We were able to coordinate rescues through Facebook. So someone could post, and then there were boats out in the water and you could dispatch the boats. It was kind of inefficient because you didn't know how long ago they had posted and their cell service was spotty. So sometimes they'd show up and there was no one there anymore. And so it was kind of inefficient, but just the fact that they could do it was incredible. I mean, to see
Yeah.
the community rally, like, you wanna know what good looks like, it's the Houston community rallying regardless of, race, religion, creed, all the things that for some reason it can be so divisive at times, just literally and metaphorically washed away, and it's just humans helping humans because it's just the right thing to do and just so beautiful.
Nicole ran the Facebook group up in where we live, just sort of
It's
south of the
awesome.
Woodlands.
Mhm.
It was, yeah, the wild experience
Yeah, and
and
everybody has a
harrowing
story.
indeed. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, you told it. I mean, so many people got caught out
Yeah.
when they weren't expecting to be. And so, uh, of course, after that happened, you know the stories and the boat rescues and the 911 not working and the
Yeah.
Facebook being the proxy for 911 instead. And I was, switchboarding. It was a really crazy experience. But what was one of the things that was most moving in that experience, besides for the resilience and the togetherness of our community, was also just some of what I learned after the fact. And so, maybe a few days later, I remember, so I spent many days doing all of this stuff, as you might imagine. And I got a phone call from somebody who had been rescued by boat. And I remember her asking me, can you come out to my community? Can you help me make my community a distribution center? So if you might remember those distribution centers where they were getting
Yeah.
supplies out to people and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, of course I can do that. And then she said, I have another question for you. Can you come check on my seniors? And I said, oh yeah, no problem. No big deal. So drove out impromptu. This was several days later and went to just go check on some of these lower income seniors. And so I'd knock on the doors and they would be happy to see me. They were very friendly. I'd say, "What, are you cleaning up?" Or, see what they were doing. They said, "Yes." So, what are you going to do about your furniture? Oh, my grandchild's going to help me remove that. And so, I'd ask them, "What are you doing about your walls
Mm.
in your homes?" And it's every house that I would visit, they'd say the same thing, which was, "Those walls are already dry."
Oh gosh.
And so it was like heartbreaking, right? And it was house after house after house that I would visit. So I had no idea how pervasive and widespread
Wow.
this situation was, because when you're in a crisis, you are the
Yeah.
fact gatherer,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
nobody else is gathering these facts. You're seeing a pattern or a trend. You got to pick up on it. It's not necessarily just the street.
Yeah.
And so
And it was level 3 contamination in the water too.
it was bad.
So
It was
that's about
very
as
bad.
that's
It's
about as
open
gross.
sewage that's sort of like
Yeah, it's literally
rolling through
straight up
people's homes,
sewage.
for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Well, and
anyway,
that was everywhere, by the way. That
oh
was the
yeah.
same because we helped in Dickinson as
Yeah.
well after we got my parents' house cleaned up, and
Yeah.
same thing. And the other thing that was interesting was the misinformation, or just and not on purpose, just lack of information or intel. So one contractor would tell you you should cut up 6 inches, another one would say
Oh,
4
yeah.
feet, and what most people probably should have been doing was ripping walls off completely and starting over because they said that contamination went so fast up the wall structure that like it could cause black mold years later. And there are probably many homes
Oh,
that
yeah.
to this day probably have some level of contamination in there.
Yeah. And so in that case, there were just so many. So um I was brokenhearted from that experience, but of course I, wasn't elected to be brokenhearted. I was supposed to go do something. So
Wow.
we mobilized hundreds of volunteers, and I would literally just put out a call.
Wow.
We would do it. I would get tips in the neighborhoods of, this is an area, lots of seniors, no one's helped. Okay, let's mobilize. Put out Facebook, social media, come volunteer with us. And everybody knew that we were mobilizing in this way, so they would join in to help.
Word of
So
mouth, it's a
yeah,
reliable kind of
exactly. And so
space.
they would
And
see us
yeah.
coming.
That's
And
incredible.
yeah, so we did that work. We made it up on the spot. To be honest with
Yeah.
you, we made it
There's
up.
no playbook.
There
for
was
it.
no,
Yeah.
here's what you ask people. So we wrote the scripts and we went out and talked to people. And then we were on our personal phones. We didn't have iPads for anybody to distribute. We literally were just
Yeah.
making it up, trying to get people synced up to who was mucking out houses, who was getting to help people. And so we were doing it as we went along. But the thing that was so striking, and so I was really happy that we were having a response in this way. But what was also heartbreaking was that when I would go out and step foot on the doorsteps, I always wore my city council shirt so people would know I wasn't like a scam artist or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the first question they'd say is, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I'm your city council member. Of course, I'm explaining to them, I'm here to help, blah, blah, blah. And they say, no, no, no. No, really, what are you doing here? Are you up for reelection already? And if you
Wow.
just pause, we just talked about all this mass
Wow.
devastation. And the first thing, and this is some of the lowest low income areas, high concentrations of seniors who get forgotten all the time.
Yeah.
And they looked at me with just, they weren't trying to be smug. That was what the thought process was,
Well,
because
their lived experiences
exactly,
proved over a series of
exactly.
years that that is when you see city
That
council
is why,
members.
yeah, that's when I matter, is when
Wow.
you need something from me. So, despite the fact that we were in the second worst disaster in American history, despite the fact that there was $125 billion in damage, the first thing that comes to mind when you see your elected official is that they must need something from me,
Mm.
Wow.
as opposed to being here to help or make a deposit into their lives. And let me say this, and one of the things that frustrates me in terms of just how we interface with our community from a public service standpoint is this, which is that we know how to find people when it's election season. Like, we know
Mm.
where your house is, we know what precinct you vote in, we
Mhm.
know a whole bunch. We even know what coffee you drink. I'm just kidding, but
I
but we do
mean,
know.
if you want to bring me my favorite coffees, like, you are welcome to.
But
You can pop over to Boomtown and pick up a Shakerado and drop it off anytime. Okay.
so, but we know how to find people, but we don't know how to show up for them when they need us.
Wow.
And I think that democracy, in my mind, we talk about a lot of the access to the ballot booth. And I think that democracy isn't just about accessing a ballot booth. I think that's step one. But I think steps 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth are delivering on the promises you make on those campaign trails, making the results that people deserve come to fruition. That's when you have a democracy that works, where that person not only goes and they cast a vote, but then they see the outcomes that you said you would deliver, as opposed to just keeping that that one-way street going. And so for so many people, it's a one-way street, and they don't see the changes, and they've heard the speeches so many times, but they don't see the outcomes that they're looking for. And so for me, it's really important to restore confidence in our ability to actually just serve, as opposed to politic with people, and really deliver the things that they need. And so that's different based on your community, but that should be the goal. Your politics and your service shouldn't be disconnected.
Mm.
They actually should be in harmony. And you hear all the time, if you're in that space, like, people say, "Oh, well, that's not going to get you elected." And you say, "Well, maybe I don't need to be." But truth be told, that there is a disconnect between how people approach their politics for campaign reasons or campaign purposes, and then what they actually go and do.
Yeah.
And what they say here isn't necessarily what they're intending to do there or believe they can do there. So then why did you say it here?
There's almost
On
like
this,
an accountability gap that
yeah,
sort of the system
yeah,
allows for that, and
exactly.
it gets sort of kind of manipulated over time. So I appreciate sort of the conversation around it. The spent a lot of time in sort of the corporate world,
Yeah.
and thinking a lot about like leadership and leadership development, and
Mhm.
sort of kind of what that looks like. And it's such a fascinating kind of space. And it's uh, I know you like your educational training is as a lawyer,
Yes.
and I just want to ask you about sort
Yeah.
of the like kind of what sparked your inspiration to kind of go down the path of law, and like sort of a little bit of like the journey there, and how that skill set is like a thread that you weave into the kind of tapestry of your service, and
Yeah.
kind of how you think about
That's
things.
a great question. I can't tell you, like, when I thought, for the first time I would become a lawyer. It was just always something I was going to do.
Hmm.
So I was kind of a very resolute little child. Still, I knew where I had places to be.
Didn't know if it was like debate club
Yeah.
or like
So I
something that
always
sort of.
kind of knew I was going to be a lawyer. Um, I would say that I probably had an understanding as time grew on that, and I was always interested, not always interested, but for a long time interested in public service. So I kind of knew
Hmm.
that those two
That
worlds
was kind
would
of an on
collide.
ramp to.
Yeah, but I didn't know how exactly. And I did not, and I had this problem of not liking politics. So I've never really liked politics. So, but I always loved helping people and I
Mm.
loved the service. And so, with that in mind, my parents were both healthcare professionals. So I thought in my mind, maybe I'll be a health law attorney.
Mm.
So that's what I went to school thinking I was going to do. I was going to be this health law attorney. I had a little bit of health policy background because I mentioned to you, my experience
Yeah,
with my
exactly.
father. So that's what I thought I was going to do. When you're in law school, you get to clerk in different law firms.
Sure.
And so they encourage you to try different practice groups out. So
Yeah.
I did, but
The
I
risk
was
is
like,
low. Go
yeah,
kind of
go, yeah, try
get some
this, try
exposure.
that. And I went into the health law practice and thought, oh my gosh, I cannot do this. Not because I wasn't skilled at it. It was just not, I just didn't feel like that was for me. Personality wise, it was a little more isolated. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been, preparing for this experience. And I feel like all I'm doing is just this research in here. I want to be out
Can I
in
share
the
that I had a
community.
similar
Yeah.
experience? I grew up in a paper mill town in Washington
Yeah.
State. You were either a lumberjack or a chemical engineer. And I decided to be a chemical engineer
Yeah.
and did all this training and showed up at a chemical plant in West Virginia. And I was like, oh no, I'm a glorified plumber.
You're
Like,
like,
what
I don't
happened?
want to do this. I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Not that
So
there's anything wrong with being a plumber. It's beautiful to be a plumber, but to go to school for that
I'm
long,
not judging. I'm just saying for me, like I like had this, like, I don't
That
know what I
wasn't-
thought it was going to be.
that wasn't your why. That was someone else's
yeah,
why.
that was
It
somebody
wasn't.
else's
Someone
why.
else
Had to
wanted
take a strong pivot, but I'll just say, like, I appreciate
Yes.
sort of like
You can take
this moment
pivot.
of like
Yeah.
the
no.
color, the picture sort of comes into focus, and you're like, wait a minute, that's
Yeah,
not
and
like
I
what
was
I
like,
thought.
nope, don't want to do it. And I asked about my
Hmm.
the practice group that I ended up getting in. I asked about them and I said, what is this group? And I said, what is public finance? What is that? And someone said, well, they build sewers. I said, what? It just was not what I was expecting to hear. Not
Yeah.
at like a big firm, right?
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean they build sewers? I think they just build sewers. And of course I said, okay, whoever I'm talking to right now, doesn't know the answer. So let me go ask somebody in that group.
Yeah.
And so when I went to go ask someone, that's when it opened my eyes to all the stuff that they were able to do with that practice. They built schools, hospitals. They do build infrastructure like sewers, but it's not just infrastructure.
little wider
It's a
aperture.
lot, yeah,
Which
and
is
it's
a
a
very
lot of an
important thing.
ability, yeah, to get your hands on public projects. So I represented different special purpose districts, like management districts, just different things in the community that help to really create the community, the built environment we see. Hospitals, schools, you name it. We worked on those kind of projects. So I loved the outcomes. Sometimes you kind of, you like the craft itself. I loved the outcomes of my work. So you could literally go and see the new hospital you just helped to build,
Yeah.
or go see the new whatever you helped to put up. And so, I enjoyed doing that work. So I did that about 7 years. And it has been such an invaluable tool as I lead and serve the city because I know all the tools in the toolkit, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but have a really strong, firm understanding of our city and our community as a whole, which isn't always the case, right? It's a huge city, 650 square miles. So
89th in density, right?
There you go.
Fourth in population. I don't know if we're still 89th, but I know we were back in 2017.
Yeah, Houston's an hour outside of Houston. So
There you
basically,
go.
yeah.
That is true.
That is so true.
we love the city of Houston.
love
like
it.
I'm got here as fast as I could kind of thing. 2 of my 4 kids were born in the area, and I've been asking this question a lot this week,
Ooh,
and so I
I'm
want to
so
sort of
excited.
like bring it up.
Houston is my
It's
favorite
a Houston
color.
question?
It is.
I kind of want to lean into Houston a little more.
I
now that
want
you're
to.
saying- I
wanna,
didn't think
like-
about that, but now
like
kind of ready for this.
Houston's like a super cool special place for a lot of different reasons. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of words that we use to kind of describe it. And like in a lot of ways, it's been the energy capital of the world
Mhm.
forever. And there's kind of this like a whole wave of change, pandemic driven, but like energy transition broadly is like a thing, but like the medical centers, this big awesome new thing. Like there's a lot of things that they're like
NASA.
building.
Oh
NASA.
my gosh, I was at NASA
Oh,
earlier this
like
week.
I
Ooh, it
like
was
the way that
insane.
Brad describes the city as a city of explorers is the way I draw that line out a little further is it's a city to be explored. Like I've been here for
Ooh.
over 10 years and like there's restaurants that you could eat at a different place every day and like still like not enjoy
Oh
it.
yeah.
So uh painting like just sort of a real abstract picture of Houston here, but it's like a crystal ball question. It's
Okay.
sort of where like what does like the city need to do to
Mhm.
like take advantage of like its full potential?
I love that question. I love it. Okay, so I feel really bullish on Houston. I think that if you just think about it, we talk about the demographics here. We're the most diverse city in the country, right? And I think we can go further. And sometimes when people talk about that diversity, they talk about it as that's what America's going to look like. But I think we can brand ourselves and truly then become America's future in a variety of ways. And so
Mm.
that includes some of the challenges that we've experienced. We've had some epic problems like Harvey, right, and flooding
Yeah.
here in Houston. But what if we became home to these transformational solutions that people would fly all over the world to come and see, just like they do with the Netherlands? And,
Yeah.
the things that are trouble points for us should become pivot points that really catapult us into an arena that makes Houston known for its innovation. Because you really think about some of that, that is our roots, right? Like we went from being a city that's not actually on the coast to then dredging a port 50 miles inland and now being home to the busiest port in the nation.
Mm.
We're the energy capital of the world, past, present, and I would venture to say future as well. And I think that, NASA and the world's largest medical center, you name it, whatever we put our minds to, we are more than capable of achieving. And I think our city's got some pretty significant challenges. Our finances are not in the shape that they need to be. In fact, that's a pretty severe challenge that we're going to be facing. But
Mm.
we've got infrastructure challenges. We are 650 square miles, almost 3 times the physical land mass as the city of Chicago, but fewer people than the city of Chicago to pay for all of that. So we've got a situation where we've cut a lot of corners over the years, but we also have this limitless possibility in our city and ingenuity in our core and DNA, which I think can not only allow us to or help us to propel beyond those problems, but then also create and become a model for other cities to follow when you think about issues around equity.
Mm.
For example, we've got the most diversity in the country. Why not have Houston be the space and place where we actually solve the challenges that these diverse communities experience? That would be an example of how Houston could lead on equity. When it comes to issues around transportation, we can be a model for other cities to follow because we are coming from a little bit of a deficit.
There's a gap.
And there's a little gap. And so we're
And a lot of
coming
holes.
Gaps, holes, cracks. Yeah.
But we become that model, so using these challenges that we face are as opportunities to really model behavior that really represents America's future. I feel really bullish on the fact that this really can become a renaissance for our city. We're coming out of a pandemic. People have had challenges. They've had a lot of introspection, hopefully, during that time. But now is the time to explore new ideas, be as bold as you possibly can be. One of the things I was really proud to get to work on, and of course, how I came to know Brad was through the work on tech and innovation. On the city side, I started it through a budget amendment because I learned that Houston was ranked at that time, I think 42 in venture capital investment.
Sure.
And so
It was around 150 million annually, I think, maybe a little less.
yeah,
It was very low.
it was very
super.
low. And so
It's over 2 billion now.
Yeah.
I like
it's come
that.
a long
way.
See,
And
I
it
told you
was-
about the impact.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be in 5 years, and we did it in about 4.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
See,
we
Brad always
surpassed
has all the stats. That's why I like to sit next to Brad. He's got the stats. He was bringing, what did you say? 90 trillion gallons of water?
9 trillion
Okay,
gallons
I'm
of water.
messing up the stats. So
That's
y'all
why I'm here to fact check too. Like
He
you
is
just sort of
Brad's got the facts, and you
And
got to check
Scott's
them.
got the fact
Scott
checks.
is checking them.
and,
Yeah.
and then Amanda takes them and multiplies them. 9 trillion to 90 trillion. It's amazing.
In true public servant fashion, right?
10x
90 trillion.
90 trillion.
I will get you there. I do want to touch. I'm glad you brought this up. I was hoping we'd get to this in the conversation today. For those who do not know, Amanda led the tech and innovation strategy and helped build the momentum through the mayor's office and that task force. And I did not know you at that time, but I was totally like fanboying over the work that you were doing and was just so amazed by it consistently. And I do remember one day, I've
this
never
is
told
true.
you
I can
this.
corroborate that.
Yeah.
He tells me about
Yeah,
it.
I do remember one day, I've never told you this, but you came to headquarters and you were meeting with Peter Licata, and I was right next door, and Peter was supposed to introduce us, and I ended up having a meeting, and you left before I got to meet you, and I was so bummed because I was like, I wanted to meet her so bad. I love the work she's doing. So full circle, now we're
Full circle, and now we're here.
And now we're friends, and it's totally worth the wait. But it like truly, like, huge kudos and thanks to you because you stewarded and pioneered a lot of that work. And then GHP was also had their task force, and John Nordby and others were doing great things there. And then Accenture obviously came in, helped bring everyone together to really like lead that onward. Thanks to folks like Brian Richards and a huge team of folks from the Accenture GHP Mayor's Task Force. And then many others were already working on things at the groundswell, kind of at the more grassroots level. And what I think is a perfect example, like it's a Harvey type example. Everyone not everyone, but all those that were involved truly rallied together and just started doing things. And there was no expectation of like, monetary exchange or a transactional relationship. It was a very altruistic journey.
Yeah.
I mean, and there were so many groups just making it happen. I mean, I was just fortunate to even, be a part of it as a, tiny speck in the corner, but like, it was just so amazing to be a part of this movement as it was happening.
Yeah.
And it's incredible how you were able to use the power and the wonder of being a public servant, right, to drive that forward. And having the support of the city, I truly believe was the critical factor that helped get it there as quickly as we were able to.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I will say thank you for all the work you did. So many, I mean, you've listed the ecosystem that really came together in a way that was just truly beautiful, right? Like it was, like you said, so many people they were foregoing getting paid. I mean, they were doing whatever they could do. So because they believed in that common vision.
And we put
and they
so
had that
many
mission.
volunteer hours in.
Right.
Just sweat equity, just because, I mean, honestly, just because we cared we care about Houston. That was the only thing that made us do it. We just love the city.
Exactly. And I think in that example, why when, people will say sometimes to me, which is kind of funny, they'll say, oh, I missed that part of your background where when did you first get into tech and innovation? I was like, when I was at City Hall. Like I was not, from the startup community, but your job as a leader in a space of public trust is both to fix challenges and address those challenges, but also seize opportunity. And in the question of where we stood in the innovation economy, I thought it was both a challenge when it was like 42 in venture capital investment. What? But then also a huge opportunity. I mean, look what happened with Chicago within 5 years of them having launched their efforts. And, you went from a few $100 million in VC investment to billions. I mean, it just was huge.
Yeah.
And so we were able to bring together the stakeholders, the startups, the investor community, academia. I mean, the innovation speaks for itself. That's Rice, right? Like they came in, and I think the beautiful
Texas
part,
A&M has also put some investment in the past few years.
Yeah, so it just speaks to it speaks to the notion that it's amazing what can get done when you're not concerned about who gets the credit.
Yep.
And so I
true.
think that was a great
that's the
example of
truth,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the power is. I mean, I remember, being in that groundswell and in some of the shadows and corners that were probably less visible, but
Yeah.
many folks were gathered together who today are pretty well known in the ecosystem. But back then, especially, like, I mean, we were just doing things. Like, we were
Yep.
just, it was kind
Making
of
it
like the
up.
people on the, John boats just going and saving lives.
Yeah.
Like, we weren't saving
Well,
lives, but like, we were just getting out there and
yeah.
just going. Like, we just did it. And I think it was all of those forces together in a very combinatory way that enabled and accelerated the maturity of that. And it was that shared consciousness. It was that shared belief system that it's important for Houston. And so as we think about how all that happened, right? And there's tons of facts and figures to show for it. I mean, if you go from 2017 to 2023, based on the numbers that I've heard, at least, we had one, maybe two, three startup development organizations. We have over 45 now. We had hundreds of startups. Now we have thousands. We had, I think, under 150 million in VC. We went over 2 billion, which was only supposed to happen in 5 years. We did it in, I think, 4.5 years. We had over 150 million in university investment. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And we had the formation of Houston Exponential and Houston Exponential Ventures, and just seeing now Tech Rodeo and things like Cup of Joey, which are fun to be a part of. And it's like so much has happened, and there's so much more. I mean, Div Inc. coming online and really staying dedicated to creating equity through entrepreneurialism and startup space, the work that you've done with the Main Street businesses as well, in addition to the traditional tech and innovation side. We take all that, and one of the hypotheses I had very early on was, could this be an accelerator for new emerging markets in Houston that creates a more resilient model that isn't dependent on only, the energy, aerospace, and medical center, but that those are definitely core,
Yeah.
and there's new emerging markets. And now we're seeing sports tech come online as one example, and esports and many others, even outside the sports space. And so one thing I'd love your thoughts on is, as we look at it from like a momentum movement perspective, right? We
Yeah.
had the moment, which was getting it off the ground.
Yeah.
We've had the momentum of, thanks to like so many people rallying together. I left the Ion off the list and things like the Canon. There's so many people that have played a role, but what does the movement look like now? Because now we're entering that kind of third phase of this. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are, and how will tech and innovation kind of be more deeply embedded into the city?
I think you have to, well, thank you for summarizing that so well. So you're also very talented at packaging this stuff all together.
Frameworks.
Yeah.
Brad's got good
He's
frameworks.
very good at this. I'm going to have to learn from you, take some notes. But I will say, I think what we have to recognize is that if we want to position ourselves to reach our potential as a city, we've got to compete for tomorrow.
Mm.
So competing for yesterday doesn't do you any good. Competing for today, even, it does you some good, but you really have got to position yourself to compete for tomorrow. And some people ask, well, why did you focus on tech and innovation? Also, because we have these other sturdy industry spaces that we're in, and we're doing well there. And I'm saying, if you know the information about Fortune 500 companies, half of the Fortune 500 companies on the list today weren't there 50 years ago. So what does that tell you? What does that say? Evolve.
Evolve or die.
I didn't say or die. You said it.
Yeah, this is evolve or die. No, it's that real.
Evolution and innovation has to be a core part of any industry or space. And so why not create this vehicle through which you can really cultivate innovation so your existing industries can evolve and innovate themselves, but then also so that you have another attraction to your community that involves those that are in the innovation space itself. I mean, to me, it was a no-brainer. And I think as it relates to where do we go as a city, I think we continue to grow. When we think about energy, for example, I think, people often see us being the energy capital of the world of the past or present. I see it as being the leader on the energy transition as well. I don't see why that's mutually exclusive. I see us leading, continuing to lead. We always have. Well, let's go. And what are the technologies to get us there? What do we need to do in order to get there? That's one question. One example. Medicine. We've got not the country's largest medical center, the world's largest medical center.
What did I hear recently? It's like, if the medical center was its own city, it would be like, I forget, like the 8th largest city in the country or like in Texas, it's like 6.5 million people annually float through the medical center.
Oh, wow.
It was
In
talking about
terms
like,
of throughput?
yeah, like as far as
Yeah.
throughput in the city in a given year.
That's
It's a
crazy.
lot of humans coming through the medical center in a
Yeah,
year.
and with that in mind, I mean, you've got, the new addition there with research. I mean,
Mm.
we've got so much
TMC3 is coming online, which is going to be
TMC3.
freaking
The
insane.
Helix Park?
Yeah.
Yes, it's gonna be like the possibilities for
Yes.
how these mainstays evolve are limitless. So I
Mm.
see us making sure that the economy continues to grow, but I also see us adding more layers to that. That also includes mom and pop as well. So we got to shore up our
Come
Main
on.
Street businesses, right? So
Yes.
we like,
Can you
you
explain
know,
a little bit more about that?
yeah.
Because that's not
So
something everybody spends their time thinking about and
exactly.
understands.
No, everybody. I mean, I can tell you as someone who's been working in both spaces, it was very easy when the tech piece came up and what was happening at that time in our economy. People were able to understand and appreciate the importance of the work. But with Main Street businesses, meaning small businesses, mom and pop sometimes, businesses under 250 people, just those sorts of smaller enterprises that are not high yield necessarily, that's when there's a disconnect. And so sometimes people see that as mutually exclusive, like, oh, if you deal with tech, you can't deal with small, Main Street small business. And I think we have to deal with all of it.
Mhm.
My goal is for us to meet people where they are. And if you're going to
Yeah.
have a strong city, you got to have strong neighborhoods. And if you have strong neighborhoods, part of having that is having your mom and pops do well. You have to have your small businesses do well. They are employers in your community. So if they're not doing well, your community doesn't do well. And so in the instance of small businesses, one of the things I found was that there were huge disparities in Houston as it related to women and minority owned businesses. So
Mm.
we studied this question. I started a task force there too, and we studied the question and we found that this is pre-COVID, but white owned small businesses were at $225 billion in sales and receipts. But then you looked at Latino owned businesses, they were only at 19.1 billion. And then
Wow.
you looked at black owned businesses, 3.3.
Wow.
And it's not because we don't have enough storefronts or businesses
Yeah.
themselves. It's an access to opportunity piece. It's an access to capital piece. What are our policies? Do our policies reflect what we say are our values?
Mm.
That's where we've got to make our next frontier
Wow.
about, in addition to shoring up some of our economic mainstays in our city, which I think we have to do, but I don't think that's mutually exclusive. I think we can do both and we shore
Yeah.
those up, but then we also do better as it
Mhm.
relates to some of these other spaces that might be a little more neighborhood centered, might center around issues of equity. I think we've got to have a focus there because we truly do have an ability in our city to be America's future in so many different ways. So it's not just innovation in terms of how we solve some of these major challenges. It's not just leading in certain industries, but it's also leading in, the fact that we align with our values.
Hmm.
And so if we say we love being the most diverse, let's solve the challenges that these diverse
Let's be the
communities
most
face.
inclusive as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah.
It's and one thing that you touched on many beautiful things, but one part I really want to highlight is in the momentum phase of building the tech and innovation ecosystem, it was really about creating the density and the collisions in the environment,
Yeah.
right? Like we needed that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the formula that we're all very familiar with if you're in Houston, TCRI, and that's talent, collisions, resources, and impact. It's multiplied. If any part goes to zero, the whole thing goes to zero is kind of the premise of it. But it's almost like if you think about it collectively, it needed the model and the framework and the methodology, kind of
Mhm.
like you need an incubator or an accelerator or a venture studio in the startup space, right? And or a family office if you're in more of like the energy sector or whatever it might be. You need your infrastructure. But now it's anchoring it to industries that I think is really where, as you were saying,
Mhm.
we are growing and we'll start to really, I think, hit those maturity points and those tipping points in the model and really start to accelerate that growth. And now that we have that infrastructure, we can apply it in new ways. I think
Mhm.
there's so much power in that. And we're seeing those more industry specific ones come out. We have the Greentown Labs and the Halliburton
Mhm.
Labs and many others that
Mhm.
have a strong presence here in Houston. From an industry perspective, I'm hearing there's a lot happening in space right now,
Mhm.
which is super exciting. We spent some time with Titan Space and Axiom here recently and got to experience some of the cool stuff that's happening there. NASA is doing some phenomenal stuff. I got to sit in behind the scenes tour at Mission Control this week. with the ISS and the Artemis mission, and I was like insanely overwhelmed and overjoyed in the best way. NASA's back, and not that they ever went anywhere, but I don't think they've been on most people's minds in quite some time. And so, like, amazing to see what's happening there. I told Scott all about it, and I had chills the whole time. And you're sitting in this chair and you're looking at the floor from the observation deck, and like you can see an astronaut on the ISS live feed in real time. Like, it is phenomenal. I got to go down to Building 9 where the astronauts train and like hang out. I mean, it was just like insane. There's so much happening here in the city, but I think, as you were saying, the real value here is that we're anchoring to industries now. And it's the convergence of bringing all of those things together, the yes and that's going to drive it forward. And the other thing that I think is super important to touch on, we talked about this a lot when we were developing the innovation strategy and some of the things that came out in phase 2. And what we were talking about with, bringing a variety of people together. We had a huge collective audience from all sorts of walks of life. And then we had some core groups as well interwoven in this model. And it was constantly about, one of our greatest challenges is actually one of our greatest opportunities. So if we're 89th in density and we're 4th in population, we constantly see that as a barrier, but really that's the accelerator to advance how we create real value. And it's about being creative in the way that we apply that and bringing invention and innovation together.
I want Houston to be the testing ground for
Yes.
all of the things. So
Yeah.
since
Flooding,
we have
whatever it is.
since we got problems with flooding, come test your flooding technologies here in Houston.
Yeah.
We got a deficit with it when it comes to transportation access.
Yeah.
Come bring your whatever
Yeah.
innovation here.
That's what Neuro's doing. I mean,
Yeah.
they said they chose Houston as one of their test places for their autonomous technology because our roads were so bad. That's why they came. That was like, it was one of the main reasons why they came here.
And I'm going to deal with
They said
the
it.
city.
I'm just regurgitating what was said, okay?
I will also deal with the city's finances because that is a key reason why a lot of our challenges.
Could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because that was cool. You mentioned that the other day, and that blew my mind.
Yeah, we've got some real trouble ahead in our finances, and
you've got some real opportunities.
But we also have opportunities. You see,
we can be a leader in fiscal responsibility.
That's right. We'll write the book on it.
We were so bad, we became so good.
They're gonna say, "How did they do that?" So, we've got some challenges. The city itself it's about a $5.7 billion budget. So it's not a small budget. But the city's oftentimes in a position where it doesn't have the resources it needs for its operations. And so on an annual basis now, I guess there are about $200 million that we have to close the gap on, or the city has to close the gap on an annual basis. Recently, the city gave police, municipal workers, and firefighters pay raises to stay competitive in the market. Sure. And so they used, however, the ARPA funds, which are federal funds that have been given to cities so that they can support themselves during the pandemic. And so with that having happened, that's going to be a big hole for the next mayor to fill. In other words, those funds are going away because they were temporary in nature. Yeah. And so that's about another $150 million that you're going to have to find like immediately once you take office if you're running for mayor like me. Yeah. And separate from that, there's this major discussion, and I know it's been in and out of the news for years now, which is around the pay parity issue for firefighters. And that has now gone on to the Texas Supreme Court. And it's, we'll find out soon in the next several months, I would imagine, what the outcome is of that ruling. But are those rulings, because they're actually two lawsuits. But ultimately, that could expose the city to a few $100 million more in liability. So It's a lot of financial pressure on the city. And years ago, the voters passed something called the revenue cap. And that is a measure that they passed so that spending wouldn't get out of control. And that was passed several years ago. We got to the threshold for the formula where spending was high enough, so to speak. And so since that time, the city has had to lower your tax rate, which you probably don't know, annually lowers your tax rate. And by the way, did you know your city, not to make this a tax discussion, but did you know the city tell me what percentage of your tax bill, do you think the city is when you pay your property tax? What do you think?
I mean, sort of what, like average property tax sort of
No,
in Harris County is like
but
3-ish
like there's
percent. And so like,
what portion?
that's kind of the
Portion?
percent
Yeah,
of, I mean, it's
percentage
got to
of.
be like a decimal and like some numbers, I would
No,
guess.
not the tax rate, but what do you think? Like, do you think it's half of your bill is current city taxes, or do you think it's like?
got it.
I don't know. I bet it's probably like, I would guess 10 to 15% of my total tax bill.
What do you think it is?
I'm a lifelong renter. I have no idea.
So it's actually 25%, but most
Okay.
people think it's like 75%.
Okay.
Yeah, so most people would think that's the bulk because that's what they interface
Which
with the
would
most.
make sense.
Yeah, but it's
I
actually.
spent a lot of time in like HCAD and like looking at certain things. I probably like skew a bit
Yeah,
more.
so you have a little.
Not that
bit
I got the
more
right
insight about
number,
that.
but like
yeah,
I skew on the polar opposite
guessed
side.
lower.
I think
yeah,
zero
most people
about
are like,
property
really?
taxes.
But the city lowers your property tax rate, and so since they now have this requirement, it has cost the city $1.5 billion. So if people want to know, for example, the city has fewer police officers today than what we had 20 years ago. Believe it or not.
I believe it.
It's like, I know that's true.
I've experienced it.
Yeah, so we
with
have
fewer collisions or more collisions with police officers.
With my truck getting stolen and
with
not
crime.
even speaking with a police officer, let alone having someone come out and like have a conversation with me. Yeah, that they were like, yeah, it's gone. Like you should just
not it's gone.
You should just like, oh no, it was gone, and then it got chopped and sold for parts because I kept getting notifications from OnStar saying your door is open, your engine's not working. So they were just ripping my truck apart. Yeah, it was pretty wild. So
you literally would get notifications.
Yeah,
for real?
I finally like asked OnStar to turn it off because I was like, please stop. This is painful.
A savage play-by-play.
Yeah, it
God.
was gut-wrenching. I loved my truck. It was beautiful. But thankfully I have great insurance. I highly recommend getting great insurance. I use State Farm and they do a total loss recovery plan.
Are they a sponsor of the podcast too?
I mean, it sounds like they need to be.
Okay.
We do random spots in case somebody listens.
Somebody wants to pick up a sponsorship.
Yeah, if anybody wants to
got one
sponsor
package for you
State Farm.
already.
Yeah, I mean, I actually love State Farm. This is not a plug at all. I really do. It's an amazing insurance company. I highly recommend it. I had my truck stolen and my bicycle stolen. I had a pretty high-end bicycle and they took amazing care. Total loss recovery with State Farm gives you everything that you paid for it, like in every upgrade you have. So I had a lift on it. I had side steps. I had this thing called the roll-in lock. They account for every single thing without depreciation and give you total loss recovery to rebuy the exact same vehicle today. It's amazing. And then my bicycle, they gave me more than what I paid for it because they couldn't find my exact one. And they accounted for supply chain shortages and inflation.
So when are y'all getting your spot?
I mean, we really like whether we do or not.
That was
I'm very
great, Brad.
passionate about
was
it.
great.
We'll splice that out, put it on Instagram,
and we'll tell State
tag
Farm.
State
Yeah.
Farm.
That sounds like my cousin owns the State Farm that I use. We should just. Okay, I have one important kind of thought that I really want to share. That's totally digressing from State Farm. When we had Dave on from Worlds,
Sure.
he used this term that I'd only heard once before, and it's called Ubuntu or Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
And it's I am who I am because we are who we are.
Okay.
And when you were talking about Houston and our community and what really makes this city what it is, I feel like that shoulders of giants mindset and that wildcatter spirit almost that we all have in the core of our DNA is what really encourages Houstonians to roll up their sleeves, dig their metaphorical boots in the dirt and just go and do things for the right reasons because it's the right thing to do. And I would be really interested in like the role of the everyday human is very passive most of the time when it comes to public policy and engaging with their local policymakers and city council humans. And I would just be like really curious on your thoughts about like, how can we all play a more active role? Because I think that we look at those types of things almost like untouchable and unreachable.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have access, you don't have access or exposure to that on a regular basis, but you could take a more active role in that. And if we all did it together rather than just expecting like one person in one role or a group of people in a group of roles like city council and the mayor office. Like, what can we all together? We're so good at rallying. Like,
Mhm.
why don't we rally together around some of these challenges and turn them into opportunities? And like, what would it take for that to be what Houston's kind of relationship between not just public private, but like human and public and private?
And I'm going to parachute in with a fact check on Brad's statement here as you're thinking about it. This is a fun role for me right now. So Ubuntu is a South African phrase. It's in Zulu, and Dave said it a little bit differently, but a person is a person through other people.
Wow.
Is sort of like there's more words in it, but the Ubuntu is the first sort of phrase, so it's summarized in that.
Wow.
But that's a person is a person through other people.
So beautiful.
Yeah. So it's this idea of you are because of the collective kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyways,
It's
give
incredible.
you a second to think about Brad's question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate both. On the question of what can you do? First, I think everybody can understand that being a part of a community is not a spectator role. It's not a passive role. It's
Mm.
something that you've got to be proactive about. Now, everybody's got a different role they can play. And so for some, that means going off and getting elected and serving in certain seats. For others, it might mean going and serving on one of your civic association boards, your HOA, coming up to City Hall if there's some major issue going on. There's something called public session that like 99.9% of people don't even know exists.
Yeah.
The mayor sits there and the city council sits there each and every single week on Tuesdays in the afternoon and hears from the public. And you might have something that you're concerned about that you want to bring to the forefront. It is on TV, y'all, so it can't be something too private.
I feel like I feel like I've seen some like
some
the
clips
good
from
stuff
that.
makes it onto TikTok.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
some clips, but there's
Hmm.
public session. There are, different boards you can serve on. I mean, there's many boards and commissions around the city that are improving our communities each and every single day where you can be civically engaged and active. If you care about green space, there's so many different conservancies that you can be a part of. If you care about issues around animals, if you care about, you got to figure out what it is that your lane is and what you care about, but then don't be passive. You can't,
Right.
critique something you've not bothered to get involved to address. And I used to have a saying about being a part of a solution. Being it's active. It's something that you really want to facilitate are the solutions. You got to get in there and play.
Get
And
in
so
there.
This
Yeah.
armchair quarterback kind of approach. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are several ways. So it's not just always politics. If there is a candidate you care about and you like and you believe in, get behind that candidate. Help support them. Write them a check. Go to an event. Tell your friends. Put a yard sign out. Send some emails out. That's advocacy.
Yeah.
And so if
Mm.
it's around issues, you can do the same. I mean, you have so much power at your disposal. It's just that people don't realize it's there. And I always say that the people in power are not the people who have the swivel chairs and the name placards. It's the people who put them there, which is the public.
Mm.
And until you reclaim that power and really understand that when you do send someone to office, it's your right and responsibility as well to hold them accountable. Don't just keep them there because you like them.
Mm.
They're ineffective. You send them there to do a job. If you're ineffective in your job, what's going to happen? You're going to be gone. They'll be like, yeah, we liked him, but didn't work out.
Right.
It's the same for public office. But you vote them out. I mean, you hold people accountable for the things that you need and desire for your community. I think you participate in the ways possible, boards and commissions. There's a long list at the city. You can literally go look up the list at Google City of Houston Board and Commissions, and there's a list of various spaces with vacancies that run the gamut. Houston Zoo Board. I mean, just all of these different things that you literally can just ask questions about, send your resume to the city, and you might be an appointee. And then there are all these nonprofits that we are so fortunate to have in Houston. I mean, we're one of the most philanthropic cities in the nation.
Yeah.
And so if
Over
you don't,
10,000 nonprofits last count I saw.
yeah,
And,
so
and
there's
that was
so
a few years
many.
ago. It could be way more now.
Get involved.
Yeah.
Whatever find that mission. I go back to the original commentary
Yeah.
about that.
Like,
right?
what's your why?
What's your why?
Yeah.
Everybody has a different
What's your
one.
purpose, your calling?
That's right. And it's
Uh-huh.
not your neighbors. You know, it might be different, and that's okay. Figure out what it is that motivates you.
See, that's an interesting point though, right? Because you have to be brave enough to really lean into that passion that you have that's just stirring within your being. And you have to be paying attention to your own humanity to really first identify, which goes back to the other part of the conversation about getting under the ice cap. And so I think we all have to enjoy the power of the pause and take those intentional moments to really explore for ourselves, what am I passionate about? What are the things that just native within my being I just absolutely love and enjoy? And I think a people the sense that I get is that access and exposure and resources are critical, right? And it can feel very intimidating to, walk into city hall or whatever it might be,
Right.
right? Or to get on a board or a committee. Like it's like, well, like what am I going to offer? Like there's a lot of emotions that go with that, a lot of doubt and
Mhm.
fear sometimes because it's unknown and it's new.
Mhm.
And so I think like be brave in that moment, be introspective, understand your humanity and the things that you're passionate about and that you enjoy just naturally, and then go and do something about that. I love to hip hop dance. It's one of my favorite things to do. And for a line dance version, I love the wobble. And as we're sitting here
A
talking,
wobble.
I do. And I like to take the wobble to a level that is like not normal. I mean, I really get into the wobble. Like it is not like, like the white boy version of the wobble. It's like I am like in the wobble with like making up my own moves. It's a blast.
We'll splice some
So-
footage of Brad's wobble.
Yeah,
here
we
on the
totally should.
episode.
So so get it. So do like the metaphorical wobble and get in there. Yeah.
So I think to Brad's point though, before he started talking about the wobble,
Well, but think about
Just
it.
before.
just
Get
before
in
he
there.
started talking.
All right, I
about
thought you were
it.
going to reinforce the wobble
No,
point.
I wasn't going there.
I
But-
really wanted you to lead into the get in there of the wobble.
But I
you
will
gotta get in
say
there.
that he's right. You got to confront your fear. That's part of, whether you are able in life to reach your potential is your willingness to confront your fears.
Sure.
And if you're not, you won't reach your potential. And I think if you really think about it, I mean, the three of us in this room, like think about how many times you thought if you didn't get something or something didn't pan out in the direction you wanted it, you were absolutely going to explode. The world was going to be over. You were not going to see another day. You knew it was just going to fall apart. The world ended, right? But
Yes.
in truth, you got the rejection of whatever it was. And what happened?
So many times.
Yeah.
Gosh.
You lived to see another day, right? Like we know the world did not explode the last time I checked. We're all here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Wow.
might get your feelings bruised a moment, but you'll be all right.
Scar tissue,
And
though, it can be good for you.
Yeah.
so I say all to say
Hmm.
it's a willingness to appreciate things in context, because once you do, it takes a lot of that unknown fear, anxiety out of the equation. It doesn't mean, and a lot of the times people think that when people have a lot of success, they call them fearless, and it's not that they're fearless.
Mm.
They have fear. They just understand the importance of confronting
They've
it.
changed their relationship with fear.
Correct. So it doesn't mean you don't get nervous about something, or you don't get anxious, or you don't
Hmm.
get fearful about it, but you have to make a decision. Am I going to be guided by my fears or by my potential or by my purpose or whatever it is that you're making that decision point about? And that's what I think we all have to ask ourselves when we are now trying to figure out this thing called life.
So when you were talking about like fear, right? I think that's such an important point of the conversation. It's something that I actually talk about a lot in the innovation and creative space. I talk a lot about creative confidence and psychological safety and how important that is in order to actually like have that moment where you can just dream and kind of explore and get to a point where you're going to create really beautiful, wonderful, important things, right? And one of my favorite fears is nomophobia, which is the fear of being disconnected from your mobile device.
What?
Yeah, it's called nomophobia.
Are you
No
making that
mobile.
up?
I wish I was.
I've never
at
heard that
times.
before.
Where is it?
Oh, yeah.
Like every time it's something you haven't
Yeah,
heard from. It's heard
it-
about it, something coming from Brad.
Yeah, it was a study done in 2010. And check this out. So 2023, this was 2010. 13 years ago, you were never more than 15 feet away from your mobile device 85% of the time. Back
Say
in
that
two,
again?
you are never more you are never more
2010.
Yeah, you are never more than 15 feet away from your mobile device 85% of the time. So
Okay.
that's 2010.
Okay.
Smartphones are 2007. So that's only 3 years into this journey. We're much further than that now, right? And so if we fast forward 16 years, obviously that data is quite outdated, but that long ago, we were that connected already to our devices just in a few years. And so this kind of conversation of fear, right? A good example of that today are things like our mobile devices. Some of the greatest fears that we have in society today, which is, you're going to laugh, it's buffering. When something's buffering on your
Oh
device.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, that
It
really
does.
freaks
That
us out.
makes me very
It does,
anxious.
right? Our batteries dying on our phones.
Yes.
Yeah, or Wi-Fi not working or cell service. These are terrifying things. And these are very real fears that we have today. I'm not making these up, right? They're funny, but they're very real. And so if you take that as a metaphor, oftentimes we see fear as something that kind of detracts from, right? Or it's a barrier to. But fear can also be a great power. It can be a great accelerator. It's where fight or flight was born. It's also, which is a very important part of our humanity, especially from a survival perspective. And so part of that role of fear is to not survive, but rather to thrive. And pulling from Stoicism and kind of the philosophy of the obstacle is the way. If you think about it as like fear actually could be a conduit through which I get to this next point. And I think it's important to, as Scott said so well, change your relationship with the things that you fear. I mean, obviously be mindful of that. And fear is also a really powerful survival tool. And there are times that if you are afraid in a situation, get out of the situation. I mean, especially like in like a real life scenario. You know, if you think someone's following you, go into a public place and like, don't be dumb. But at the same time, in the more metaphorical sense, like use that power for good and allow that to be an accelerator for driving toward better things, and sometimes lean into the fear instead of trying to brush it under the rug and overcome it.
Amanda, this has been awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for coming and being on the show.
We love to conclude every
I have one fact check
episode
to bring in.
Oh.
My Harvey water volume research suggests that it's a really wide range of numbers that people don't agree on. But it seems that the 9 trillion number was in the first day.
Wow.
And that actually Harvey collectively dumped closer to 30 trillion gallons. Not all of it on Houston, but sort of as a storm.
Yeah, it was the 55 area counties, I believe, collectively.
And which, according to some source on the internet, which we all know is the truth,
Not the internet.
Is the
well, I mean, if it's on the internet, it's obviously true.
It's the volume of Niagara Falls that flows over Niagara Falls in an entire year.
Wow.
So somewhere between like 1 trillion gallons and Niagara Falls for a year is the right answer.
Okay. So a lot of water was dumped on the city, and I heard it.
And nobody directly measured it.
Yeah.
There's some equation somewhere.
I also heard that Houston sunk 1/4 of an inch from the weight of the water. I'd be curious if you fact check that one maybe for the next episode.
I could believe that.
So we love to conclude every episode with an open-ended question to the audience, right? And we never know what it is because obviously we do know this is the unformat and just
and
a
half the
conversation.
time I forget about it until this moment of the podcast.
Which is why
sometimes
it's
it's
actually
clear.
why I bring it up because Scott
Brad's idea.
Yeah,
guys.
Scott will kind of like roll out the end of the show and I'll have to subtly be like, and so we love to close every episode because he kind of forgets on me. It's fine. And that said, so if
we need
there
like
were
a little bell, and it's like question time.
Yeah.
Sometimes the question's really clear, sort of like through the podcast, and then I'll look at Brad and be like, "That's the question."
Yeah.
But
so we love to
discover it here
open
at
it
the
up to the guest, obviously first. And is there some like philosophical or very open-ended question that you would love to share with the audience?
So this is when I ask the question, I want them to ponder this, and then you just want to have them ask.
We're just putting it out into the universe.
Okay, well, I'll go with theme because we've been talking about purpose. What is your purpose?
Oh, okay.
What is your purpose? What would you do for free if you had to that makes you feel fulfilled and makes you feel alignment with yourself and why you're here?
I'm a fan.
That's deep.
I love it. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
That was like
super cool.
Silence. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. This was great. Thank y'all.
We're so happy to have you. And
we also end with a
we're
boom.
Super stoked
Thank
for you
you.
and your mail run.
Yeah.
Yeah, encourage everybody to get out there and like check out the issues, like be smart, like be an active voter, like
and
get
get out and
involved in
vote.
the process.
That's
like
right.
that's great
Yeah.
advice.
Whoever you vote for, get out and vote. Obviously, I'm a little biased toward Amanda, but but whoever you vote for, just go vote. Boom.
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 Onward.
I have to tell y'all, I know y'all were trying to wrap me up, but I have to tell y'all, I
Please.
went to the Oprah Winfrey show, y'all.
Stop it.
I'm not lying.
Was that amazing?
Yes.
That was in Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
That's cool.
I went to the
Was
Jay
it a day
Leno
where
show.
she gave away
Wasn't the
something?
same.
So here's the story.
I want to
You
know
ready?
what you got.
Yes.
Ready?
Yeah.
So I go and was with my mother.
Oh,
and
this is amazing.
we're waiting. So there's this line
Yeah.
outside of Harpo Studios, right? This is years ago. And
You know you're going to get in, or you don't know?
You're know you're going to get in. You don't know which show you're there for.
Oh.
So no one knows on the outside. You just stand in your line and they tell you, stand here, and you just stand in line. So everybody's out here looking at everybody, trying to figure it out. There are rumors that get spread in the line.
Oh my gosh.
I heard it was Oprah's favorite theme show. And if you think about that rumor, and I went, it was after I graduated from college. So that was what, May, June, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so this right after my graduation season. And so I was like, Oprah's favorite things, because that's like usually a winter episode.
Yeah.
And so we're all wearing summer clothes. So that doesn't make, you try to figure it out.
Yeah,
so I was like, that's not true. We're not even dressed for the Oprah favorite things show. So I'm, but everybody's whispering and saying, oh, I have somebody inside that knows. So long story short, finally, after waiting outside.
How long did you have to wait outside?
It seemed like an eternity.
Right? It's like so agonizing. I would be like, this is so long.
So I don't know what it really was.
It was 12 and a half minutes, but it was.
It felt like 12 and a half hours, okay?
So then they say, come on in. And they're real like official, right? Like this is like the Secret Service kind of official. Everybody knows what they're doing. In place.
It's a full production. You're
now, so they're not here for the games.
Yeah.
Then they say, when you get inside, then they start calling in small groups to go inside the studio.
Wow.
But they'll tell you when you come in, and they'll tell you where you must be seated.
Whoa.
So you know how like everything looks so polished,
Yeah.
or used to look so polished?
Oh yeah, for sure.
They color coordinate the audience. Y'all.
No way.
I'm not lying. I'm telling y'all all the secrets.
Wow.
They color coordinate the audience. So they'll put like blush tones over here and blues, and
this is
they
amazing.
mix it. Like this is a whole science.
Based on what they're wearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a whole science. Like you don't just get to file in based on where you were standing in line.
So it's
Sure.
so organized.
No,
Yeah, they're not going to leave it
they
up to
got a
random.
whole
No.
different.
Wow.
They had their brand.
They probably have
on
like
some
AI
other,
working in like the line.
I'm certain.
And like, yeah.
So they get you
Generative
where they
AI.
want you to be.
Mm-hmm.
So on the show where I went in, I see a black box under each chair.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, oh my God. So when you walk in, they say,
Whoa.
do not, it's like the voice of God coming in.
Yeah.
Do not touch anything. Do not, touch anything. Just
Scott,
sit there.
Scott, can you give us a voice of God real quick?
Yeah.
Hands off. Keep your hands to yourself.
Yep,
So
that's
they
what it
are
sounded
like,
like, right?
you cannot come in there messing with stuff. So she has us have a seat, and their black box says,
Oh my
surely
gosh.
this is a gift of
Sure.
some sort.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what it was.
It's like a speaker.
So
box.
I don't want to get in trouble, but I really needed to find out.
Yeah.
So I just kind of
Peaked.
I kind of leaned over all the way so I could try to feel under my chair to see what it was without letting them know what was happening. Long story short, it was not a gift.
Oh,
In fact, it was a remote control because I happened to have been on Oprah's $1 Million Wedding Show. So that's the show I was on. Not me
Whoa,
personally,
yeah.
but it was a voting, like remote control for you to cast the votes on who's going to get $1 million
my
weddings. I
gosh.
was like, what? I don't want to cast my vote on $1 million. I want to drive home in a car. you know?
Obviously. Which I've always wondered.
Or read a book.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
A book would have been cool. I've always
That is a
wondered,
letdown.
do you have to pay the taxes on the car, or does she pay the
Oh,
taxes
you got to
also?
pay taxes. That's a gift.
I'm sure they.
Okay.
I'm sure they do. I doubt they gross it up, but I mean, maybe. I
Because
don't
I'm
know.
like, that could be a few $1,000s.
No, you got to pay the tax.
Okay. Like the individual that gets
The
the gift
individual
of the
has
car.
to pay the tax.
Yeah, that. So I guess you have to choose if you're actually going to accept
You
the
can
car or not.
Yeah, correct.
Because you could say no based
can
on
say
that.
no.
Or you
Well,
just take
that's
it and
an
sell it.
Sorry, I know that
amazing.
was not
I
the
love it.
ending you
It's
wanted, but
so
you
beautiful.
brought in Oprah, and I
Oh,
could not
it's
give you my
actually a
Oprah
yes
story.
and to what I was going to share, which is I was listening to an episode over the weekend of the Oprah Super Soul Sundays. I think I got it right this time.
Ding, ding, ding.
Thank you, Oprah. Please don't be so mad at me for butchering it the first two times. It's like a tongue twister. My brain just can't seem to compute. I don't understand why. And the gentleman that was on, his name's Wes, and he was saying something very similar to what you just shared about what is the thing that you would do no matter what, whether you got paid for it or not, simply because it's what you actually believe in. It's where you're most alive in your humanity. It's a thing that every night when you go to bed, you feel so fulfilled. When you wake up in the morning, you look at yourself in the mirror, you feel accomplished. Like, what is that? As Scott says, the echo. What is that infinite ambition? What is the why? All of that rallied together that is really going to shape and drive and accelerate humanity and society, something so far beyond yourself, that really matters.